Thank you very much, Alexandra. And it is actually quite an interesting opportunity to be here and speaking on this theme at this time, because we're meeting on the sidelines of the WTO Ministerial, and we're talking about the Global Europe Strategy, which was, as you say, almost a recognition that the WTO had lost credibility, had lost momentum, had lost any sense of forward purpose. War on Want has, as you said, been working on the interface between labour rights and the trade agenda for many years now. We come out of the labour movement as an organisation, and we have many partners in trade unions in the developing countries, and our alliances and affiliates with trade unions throughout Europe as well. And we've been particularly looking at the impact of the European Union's trade strategy and at the impact of the WTO negotiations on labour rights and on employment generally, particularly the loss of jobs around the world as a result of trade liberalisation. And I think it's important to re-emphasise the point that the Global Europe Strategy is not just about opening up markets for European exporters in foreign countries. Yes, it certainly says that it's about trying to open up markets in the emerging economies of the Global South. It's also, as you say, about trying to get access to natural resources in those countries. But it's also a very strong internal agenda within the European Union itself, both in terms of liberalising markets within Europe and in terms of deregulation, lowering the standards which currently exist in Europe, and particularly lowering them to the same level as those in the USA. It didn't say that explicitly in the Global Europe final document, but it was very clear in the documents leading up to that. And also when Peter Mandelson, the former EU Trade Commissioner, spoke about the Global Europe Strategy, he made very clear that part of the strategy behind it was to lower our labour standards and our environmental standards and other key European standards to the level of the US, so that there wouldn't be any barriers or obstacles to US companies and to European companies competing in the world. And I think that for us is why Global Europe as a document is a charter for transnational capital, not just for European capital going out of Europe, but for transnational capital coming into Europe at the same time. And that we see that as a charter for capital to the detriment of the interests of labour. And when I just come on to some of the findings that we have as a result of the research we've done, that will become clearer. But I think what was interesting for us is that the European Union, the European Commission in particular, actually agreed with us on many of the likely consequences of the Global Europe Strategy. And through the sustainability impact assessments that the European Union commissioned around both the WTO and bilateral trade agreements, it made absolutely clear that there were going to be significant, in its words, significant losses for labour, significant job losses both outside the EU and inside the EU as a result of the Global Europe Strategy. And in the report which we brought out, which we have copies of here, in English and Spanish, please take as many home as you can carry, because we don't need to take them back to London. We've got some of the results of those European Union sustainability impact assessments. What's also interesting is at the beginning of next year, there is going to be a new book published, which is called The Truth About Trade, which is published by one of the people who is actually involved in doing these sustainability impact assessments. And he's been able to actually publish the results which didn't get into the final reports which came out from the European Commission. So there's a very good book which is coming out, which gives a broader overview of the impact through those sustainability impact assessments. And they showed, for example, this massive deindustrialization in countries where the European Union is going to start its new trade relations. For example, in Mercosur, you see Brazil, Paraguay particularly, and Uruguay losing massive swathes of their industrial and manufacturing sectors, with millions of jobs being lost in those countries. I'm not going to go through all the statistics because we have the report here to hand out to people. But in the Mediterranean region as well, when the EU Mediterranean Free Trade Agreement is being negotiated, the predictions of the Commission that the industrial and manufacturing sectors of countries like Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Syria and Jordan will be wiped out. 99% of some of the sectors of manufacturing in Egypt will be wiped out with vast loss of jobs. Again, millions of jobs lost in the manufacturing and industrial sectors, and with that, a great loss in terms of their development potential. Because as we know, that sector of the economy is absolutely critical for the future development of those economies. India and China, obviously held up to be the great winners from trade liberalization at the national macroeconomic level, will also see enormous job losses in the sectors which they're forced to open up through the Global Europe Strategy. And as we know from the economic partnership agreements in West Africa, the European Union's own assessment by PricewaterhouseCoopers said it would lead to the wiping out of the manufacturing sector in West Africa, and therefore with the same number of jobs lost. But also what's interesting, and again what Alexander said about the internal impacts of the European Union strategy. The European Union Global Europe Strategy says that they recognise, quote, there will be large-scale redundancies within Europe as a result of the Global Europe Strategy. And in order to try to counter this, they set up the European Globalization Adjustment Fund, which has a budget of €3.5 billion over the first 7 years of its life, in order to try to provide compensation for these job losses around Europe.